You make a promise saying, you come to my institution and I will guarantee you you're going to get your education in a reasonable amount of time, and you will get the knowledge and skills to go and do whatever you want in your life. That's the promise made, and the promise has not been kept.
Welcome to Radical Cooperation. I'm Dr. Michael Horowitz, Chancellor of the Community Solution Education System. We're a little shy of 100 days into the second Trump administration as we record, and higher education was already reeling from many, many pressures, whether there were economic, regulatory, political, changing public perception of higher education. So we have a phenomenal guest for this episode to talk all of that through. Welcome to Dr. Sonny Ramaswamy, who I got to know in your last position as CEO and president of one of our major accrediting bodies in higher ed, the Northwest Commission. That said, Sonny, you have such a varied background. You're an immigrant to this country. You've been a scientific researcher, a member of the Obama administration, a university leader. I think I could go on a lot further. I would love to hear in your words an overview of your background and in particular how it's impacted your view of American higher education.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Horowitz. Michael, thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to this important conversation. As you said, we're 100 days into the second Trump administration, and we're seeing what's happening. And it's been, we're all sort of, just putting a seatbelt on in and of itself is not sufficient. I think it's really bringing about radical change. And so I hope we can dive into some of the details in there very quickly in terms of my background itself. Yeah, you're correct. I was born and raised in India. And my mother raised us as a single parent. We're four brothers. I was 10 years old when my dad passed away in a fire accident. He saved a man and he died. My dad died. So my mother, with her 8th grade education, raised us four boys. And she worked 3 different jobs to raise us. And her admonition constantly was education was going to be the passport out of the morass of poverty. And so her reminder to us was to maintain our integrity, to make a difference, and to do everything we could to support the lesser of our brothers and sisters as well. That was our admonition to us. And so, I went to Jesuit schools in India and ended up getting into the agricultural college in Bangalore, India, and had the privilege of meeting an American, a gentleman named Norman Borlaug, Borlaug. You may have heard of him. He got the Nobel Peace Prize back in 1971 for the fact that he came up with a way to feed 1 billion people, including yours truly. And India, you may know, back in those days, was a basket case, couldn't feed itself. So I was fed by the efforts of this great American. He was my hero, by the way. The second thing that happened was the education that I received at the agricultural college was created with the support and effort of the United States taxpayers. The U.S. Agency for International Development, which has been in the news, as you know, which has been basically destroyed, and that was instrumental in getting American land-grant universities like, Kansas State University, Ohio State University, and others to go to India to help build the science-based enterprise to promote agricultural efforts in India. The net effect of that was by 1973, India became a net exporter of grain, from being a basket case, being unable to feed itself, to being a net exporter of grain. And today, as you know, India is the 4th or 5th largest economy in the world. And so it's thanks in large measure to the American taxpayer. So the 2 things that happened to me, one, our mother raising us, and the other one, my education and seeing Norman Borlaug. Norman Borlaug is considered to be a hunger fighter. and I wanted to be a hunger fighter as well. So lo and behold, I finished my degree, and then I, met this professor. So USAID sent professors from land grant universities to India. I met with that gentleman, and he offered for me to come to the United States to get my PhD, which I did at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and got my PhD. And then I got talked into staying put. And one fine day in 2011, on August the 7th, I get a phone call saying that the president wants to appoint me to head the scientific enterprise for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is to direct the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And who'd have thunk it, for a kid that grew up in India, poor, to be afforded the opportunity to work for the President of the United States. And I was stoked, and I said yes. It took about 9 months to go through the vetting process, and I had a fantastic time leading our science and education enterprise in the food and agricultural and natural resources areas for our nation. So it has a global impact, which I did. And then I finished it up. And by the way, I worked for Trump as well, President Trump, for a year and a half as I wrapped up. And then I got headhunted. I got offered the presidencies of a couple of land grant universities. And then I got offered the presidency of the Northwest Commission to become an accreditor, which has a more global impact, where the university is a single entity. And so I ended up taking the presidency of the Northeast Commission, and here I am. As you know, Michael, I just decided there's way too many things happening, and I had committed to doing the work with the commission for about 5 years. I stayed on for 6 years plus, and decided it was time for me to actually stay out of it and support our nation's, America's well-being and the global well-being as well, which I could do much more effectively being outside than inside. And that way do not jeopardize the organization that I was leading as well. So here we are.
It's a phenomenal story. In your own story, you've illustrated this vast web that is American higher education, the public land grants, and their impact on science and agriculture and food. And it's been commented, I think, by now many times that American higher education is not one ecosystem. You know that well. We have so many different types of institutions. One thing that's become clear, I mean, you mentioned public funding, so that's under duress. That said, there's been economic duress building for years and years and years at private institutions as well. I'm sure you saw that at Northwest. Your thoughts on how did that come to be? I mean, it was not too long ago that Clayton Christensen was saying, half the colleges in America would close. I think he was linking that as much to online, that revolution. And that's certainly happened. And we see essentially economic failure and stress throughout the sector.
Yeah. Well, Michael, it's very easy to go ahead and point fingers at the outsiders, right? All the externalities. No doubt of that. What you said is absolutely spot on, and we can get into it a little more detail as well. But, paraphrasing Pogo, I've seen the enemy, and he is us. And in many ways, I think the academic institutions are to blame for where they're at. And the handwriting has been on the wall now for multiple years already. One of which is the demographics of this country. This country, we've been very lucky compared with other countries like in Europe and Japan and Korea, South Korea, and other, the Eastern European countries as well. We're very lucky because people like me have come to this country. These immigrants that have come to this country, that have brought in that vitality and that energy and the intellectual capacity and created all these enterprises. When you think of Google and when you think of all these other enterprises, the immigrant community has helped create that, right? So they have come, they've had, children, and those children have continued to maintain the well-being of the American higher education enterprise. But we're not making enough babies in this country. And if you look at the data, like this past year, we're only making about 1.8 babies per couple. We need to be making at least 2.0 to sustain this population, right? We actually got to make more than that. We're making 1.8. So it's slowly declining, right? But for these immigrants that have come in. All right. So the handwriting on the wall, looking at Western Europe, for example, or Japan, which is even worse, or South Korea, handwriting's been on the wall. Number one. Number two, we had the economic recession, the deep economic recession of 2007, 2008, and there's a series of things that come together. And the third thing that has happened is, today, if you look at the data today, across the board, not just privates, but across the board, publics and privates, almost 1 out of 2 students that comes into our colleges and universities is lost. They do not graduate.
That's been brought up years ago. I'm largely in the graduate space, which isn't analyzed as closely. It might even be worse. So I completely agree with you. Completion has been and remains the biggest issue in higher ed. So let's talk about those self-inflicted wounds. How did we create a higher ed system with such little regard for the issue of completion?
Yeah. Well, again, I think what has happened is we've been sort of complacent because there was an unending supply of students wanting to come in, because this whole idea that you got to get, post-secondary education, you're going to live better, you live longer, you live healthier. All of these things have been created, right? And so things have been going along very well. Actually, you go back into the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, universities and colleges really invested the time and energy to support the students, make sure that they get the education that they came to our institutions for, and then graduate in a reasonable amount of time with the least amount of indebtedness and go on to become contributing members of society. But what happens is in the 1980s, 1990s, you get this complacency coming into play. And really, it's just this complacency. The irony of it is America's invented data collection and all these capabilities and capacities to look at data, utilize data to inform where we're going. And we've not paid attention to it, right? And so what has happened is that the complacency, and now, of course, with the demographic cliff, as we refer to it, right? By the way, 2025, the incoming class that's coming into our universities and colleges this year in the fall will be the largest class ever, and then it goes down after that. By 2030, we're going to be in a whole lot of hurt. So really, it's the combination of the complacency. We didn't do what we're supposed to be doing. The fundamentals. I refer to this, Michael, as you know, I write a lot about this as well, including in the Beacon, the Northeast Commission's newsletter. Focus on the fundamentals.
I like that a lot. I know we have to deal with the externalities, and yet we'd be remiss if we didn't use this as an opportunity to clean up our own kitchen, our own home. So I think we now have nearly 40 million students with some credit, no degree. Many, many people, all but thesis and masters. A shocking number of people have completed much doctoral work and never got their PhD. Your observation, is it the same of not dealing with the fundamentals? Any thoughts on its vast pool of students that have not completed?
Yeah, great observation. So we've got a situation where the recruitment folks at our colleges and universities and others have been focusing on this 18-year-old coming in, right? That 18-year-old is a diminishing resource. Okay, so suddenly we're waking up to that, number one. But we do have it's almost 45 million people that you're referring to that need the reskilling, the upskilling. They've got some amount of post-secondary education, either undergraduate credit hours or graduate credit hours. And many of them went to fight these wars for us. That's another story to think of, right? The veterans that we've got. And so we've got these millions of people. So how can you deliver what I refer to as anytime, anywhere education? If you're going to say you're a student-centered college, take the education to where the student is. These individuals that need this reskilling and upskilling that we're talking about, the 40 plus million, there's a fantastic opportunity. And we, university, and during the pandemic, we saw how quickly our colleges were able to switch to virtual education and online education and things like that. Why don't we bring all that energy and that into the innovations together to reach out to these 40 plus million people that are out there, these veterans. There's about 7 million veterans that can be part of this as well. And then the graduate students, pretty significant. I'd say about 10% of that 45 million, approximately about 8 to 10%, are individuals that have had post-baccalaureate credit hours, post-baccalaureate experiences. And maybe they got their, doctoral degrees and things like that, but just couldn't carry it. They're ABDs, right? And so all about dissertation, as we call it, ABDs. And that's where we're at, is this missed opportunity for our institutions to say, yes, we want to, help you achieve whatever that goal is that you've got. And, you may remember going back to, Bill Clinton's days when he ran for the presidency in 1992, he talked about the economy stupid, right? I co-opted that phrase back in 2018 when I came to NWCCU. I started talking about it's the students stupid. Focus on the students. The students are not just the 18-year-old. That's one part of your enterprise.
Our typical student at the Community Solution are 6 universities, 35-year-old working woman, largely aiming toward a graduate degree that will give, I think, a powerful profession in life: a mental health counselor, a physician, a psychologist, a teacher, a social worker. I think some of those licensure forces kind of keep us on track with completion. And absolutely, one more note though: how did we get so far from focus on the student? What broke down there?
Well, again, there's the complacency, right? And institutions became complacent and didn't pay any attention or paid little attention to the fact that the students coming in, more than 1 out of 2. By the way, if you were to dig a little deeper, go to students that come from underserved communities and underrepresented communities, it's much worse. It's only about 30% that graduate, and on a 6-year basis. Shame on us, on a 6-year basis, no less, right? So really, it is like, they'll come in, they'll pay, they'll take their loans, and we've got people owing almost $2 trillion in America.
And how did that tie into so many colleges then in economic pressure as a result? Did the two connect in your view?
Absolutely. If I tell you, the institutions, if they're not paying attention to making sure that there's a promise made, right? Even at your, if you make a promise saying you come to my institution and I will guarantee you're going to get your education in a reasonable amount of time, and you will get the knowledge and skills to go and do whatever you want in your life, right? That's the promise made. And the promise has not been kept on our part, at our academic institutions. And so you got to rethink it as to how, reimagine and re-engineer this whole enterprise that says that, we use words like, oh, we're student-centered. I think it's bogus, or, statement that institutions make. Rethink it. How can you make sure that the students are at the center of everything that you do? Here, a few years ago, I came up with a path forward. I created a mnemonic, and it was A, B, C, D, E, F, right? A for advising, particularly intrusive advising. And we know from the work that Tim Rennick at Georgia State University and others have done that advising is critically important. Make sure that you're advising the students with what they need. But you know who knows your student the most is that professor or that instructor that's boots on the ground, looking at interacting with that student every day. That's who needs to be involved in this advising as well. B, the second item, is for behavior, right? With fentanyl and all these other drug problems that we've got, there's some behaviors that we may be observing. That professor, that instructor that's in the boots on the ground, it's not the advisor who may meet that individual once a semester or once a term or whatever it is. But that individual is seeing that student every day. Are there some changes that are happening in the behavior of that particular student? Make sure that you reach out to that student. Ask them what's going on. Again, Tim Rennick and others at Georgia State and other universities are doing an exquisite job of doing that too. C is for courses. Oftentimes what happens is because of budget cuts and all that, universities will eliminate these courses. and the student does not have the, if they're on track to finish the degree within, 4 years, they're not even going to have that particular course in that sequence, right? If I'm an advisor, I should say, you know what, my college will not be offering this course that you need, Psychology 301. But I tell you what, you go to this other university that's offering it online, take it, and this college will go ahead and accept that credit for you, right? That's what it's all about. That student-centered, hands-on advice. D is for data, right? We gotta be data informed about everything. If you can't measure, you cannot make a difference. And we have the capacity. This is the irony of the whole thing. America's invented these things, right? Let's go ahead and use that capacity and take data, take evidence, and inform ourselves on what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and things like that. E is for experiential education. We know, the folks at the University of Indiana, or Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, have a center that studies the impact of high impact practices on student outcomes. Experiential learning, internships, externship, hands-on learning, and things like that are critically important, right? That's for E, for experiential education. And finally, last but not least, is F, for finances. Okay, I'm not talking about scholarships and, things like that. What I'm talking about, again, a page out of what Georgia State University has done exquisitely well, right? Which is some students have completed 120 credit hours. They're lacking 4 credit hours to finish that degree. But life happened. Like you said, those moms that come and work, the single parents that are studying at your institution, life happens. They created this fund called just-in-time funding. It may be about $500. Maybe it's tuition for that student to pay for that particular term so they can finish out. It's a nominal sum of money that's going to get you dividends. And people say, oh my gosh, if Georgia State University people went up in arms saying, oh, you're spending all this money. Well, guess what? When you look now, 5-6 years later, the return on investment, because the students are graduating, they're leaving, they become alumni. They say, you know what, Georgia State does this for me. I'm going to give money back to that institution.
That's incredible. So it's a virtuous circle. That's a good segue to another topic. And thank you for that mnemonic, the area of regulation, because you're absolutely right. We went online in a flash. Some institutions, some struggled. They got there. My experience at the Community Solution, if we can do a program that's either all online, or in the case of a discipline that requires a placement like social work or psychology, of course, that's going to be in person. The rest of it's online. That's been a bit of a challenge. Regulation, I think, my observation tends to lag what's possible on the ground. I mean, you barreled right in at Northwest. And as I recall, you said focus on the student and institutional sustainability and equity and inclusion for everybody. And that's about it. But there's a myriad of regulation from the states, who it seems to me are getting more emboldened in this era, from our accreditors, programmatic and what we used to call regional, the institutional accreditors. And now I would say it's never been that simple to deal with the U.S. Department of Education. And this is an extreme moment where we tend to have, under Democratic administrations, more and more regulation. And then it whipsaws if a Republican comes into power. So you've now been in that regulatory space as well as in the space of the teacher, the leader. Talk to us about regulation and its role in American higher ed.
All right, Michael, with all due respect, I'm sorry, but I think there's a false narrative that's been created in the minds of many universities and colleges, right? They say, oh, well, there are those regulations. Oh, well, there are those accreditors, right? Right? It's a false narrative. I saw that personally.
Yeah, say more.
Yeah. I said, is the lack of your imagination. Come to me with any idea that you've got, and we'll help you figure it out. Right?
Do you think that was typical, let's say, of any state USA, where you're asking, needing to do something, and you need a particular? I sense that you're an outlier, and I agree. I've worked extremely well now with Northwest. With WASC accredits most of our institutions. They've been a pleasure to work with. Years ago at the Higher Learning Commission, that was not the situation. They did not want to hear about different models, different innovation. In fact, that was the reason that we took the opportunity to move to WASC and now to Northwest, because those folks were willing to listen. So, yeah, I think you're right. We have to work with it. But do you not think there's an overcrowding of the regulatory space?
Well, I tell you, I think, paraphrasing the television commercial from the old days for Virginia Slims, you've come a long way, baby. And I think accreditors, the institutional accreditors like Northwest Commission, like WASC, like Higher Learning Commission, like SAC-COC, et cetera, have come quite a ways from where we were a few years ago. And we've gotten better. In part, I think, I'm sure you'd agree with this. The Northwest Commission was a trendsetter, was an innovator. And so what has happened is, and WASC as well, right? And what has happened is that the others are stepping up saying, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. Let's go ahead. Just like I've been saying that, is the students stupid? I think accreditors need to say, it's the institutions. We got to help them think better, think differently, reimagine, re-engineer what they do. Yeah, sure, we got regulations. There's no doubt about it. But you can play within the context of those regulations. And yeah, you're correct. These administrations come and go, whether it's Democrat or Republicans, like a yo-yo, up and down, up and down, up and down, and things like that. But I think the institutions really have everything that they can do under their control, and accreditors today, as opposed to 7-8 years ago, are a very different model system that we've got. We're willing to listen. We're willing to help our institutions think and reimagine and re-engineer.
Yeah, and I would agree with you that the institutional accreditors are probably not the stumbling blocks at the moment. There have been cases just in the last few months of institutions online receiving letters from states saying, stop educating in my state. And the inquiry is, well, what do we need to do to educate? Well, we don't have that process set up yet, or we haven't issued the forms. So I hear you. I think the institutional accreditors, at least the three I've worked with, have made a lot of progress. It's tough though when we just got approved. Exciting news yesterday to recruit students to our second medical school that we're building here in Chicago, what's called pre-accreditation. Now, it had to go through the state of Illinois, and it did go through, but it was on the docket for about a year. Some of the stuff just takes too long, in my view, and you have to wonder, is all of it necessary? I know we've been fond of this, state accreditor, feds. That in turn drives up the cost. You need lawyers, you need compliance people. The valuable ones are the ALOs because they're focused on the education. I'm not sure that there's inherent value in the myriad of state and Department of Ed regs. Yeah.
One of the things that we did, again, going back to the Northwest Commission, we stayed in constant contact with the state regulatory authorities and the feds, because there should be no surprises. And no surprises. We met every quarter, and then on a formal basis, and then informally every other week, every month. Their staff and our staff, were in constant contact. We stayed in touch with the federal government, our analyst in the accreditation office and the director of the accreditation office, and Herman Bounds, and because everybody needed to be on the note.
You likely were on the edge of the continuum, because that's exactly what's needed. That kind of coordination, cooperation versus, I have to knock down this one and I have to go talk to that one. A positive story in that light, University of Western States joined because they wanted the opportunity to grow in their mission, to add programs. Of course, under the Biden administration, a rule was put in that if affiliation with our system happens, there's a growth restriction for 2 years. So there's a bit of an irony in all that. I think you at Northwest said this is a great idea. They'll be able to do more. The other reg says no. So we went through the way you appeal it, a letter of credit. Of course, the team we were working with, the multi-regional team, we're not working, has all been eliminated. And we were about to pull a new program in occupational therapy because we could not get an answer from Ed. But to their credit, the folks who are left working there, they had to catch up. They said, we don't have any of the paperwork. Please resend it. And they just approved it the other day. So the good news is Western states will be launching a great new graduate program. What you described, I would call radical cooperation in the regulatory space. What are ways that you've seen that you've established in your career of radical cooperation, public, private, colleges together? Talk to us about that and how you create that mindset and that practical approach to doing more with the same.
Well, Michael, I love that radical cooperation, right, that you came up with. And you've written a book about that too, that I had the privilege of reading. That was a few months ago, I think, or maybe a year ago or something like that.
Yeah, you helped me with the process of getting there. We're getting close.
Right. So it, we talk about this Senegalese, West African proverb, right? It takes a village. In every enterprise, it takes a village. Lone Rangers are never going to be successful by themselves. It's not going to happen, right? And so what you're talking about, this radical cooperation, it's not a radical idea. As humans, we have cooperated for the success we've seen. Evolutionarily, I'm a biologist, I'm an entomologist, and you may know, I'm one of the world's experts on insect sex, by the way. You should invite me back to talk about insect sex if you want to. But, that's what it's all about. We see this evolutionarily. The ones that cooperate survive. The ones that don't will not. You may have seen I just, posted that the universities should work collectively to deal with what is happening, what's coming out of Washington, D.C., the intimidation, the uncertainty, the threats, and so on. You work at it collectively. It's going to be a lot more challenging than doing it individually. So that radical cooperation idea is a brilliant idea. I think it means, evolutionarily, it shows us that we can indeed make progress and deal with these daunting challenges as well. And I think it's a no-brainer.
So going back to self-inflicted wounds that you referenced at the beginning, how did higher ed colleges get so self-contained? This idea I have to do it all myself. I have to replicate 4,000 times a financial office or a technology office. What's your observation? And you come from outside the United States.
Yeah. Well, it's siloed, and it's true in other countries as well, by the way. And unfortunately, it's siloed in part. Think of the analogy, the metaphor, the analogy, or the learnings that we can get is looking at our college athletics programs, right? I'm number one. I want to be the best, the greatest, etc. This is how we're going to do it. I'm going to be self-contained. I'm going to be siloed. I don't need to talk to even my institution that's just down the street, right? I'm going to have everything there is for my students. That should not be the model. We should be thinking of how do we go ahead. If we're thinking about being student-centered, think of the student first. What does the student want? What do they want to achieve? And help them achieve that in a reasonable amount of time, right? And I think we'll make tremendous progress. And I think these silos need to be broken down. And I think the bean counters what has driven these things, right? In part, there's, because they want to know that I put so many dollars, you got so many students, you need so many to graduate, which is a bogus argument. Students today, I use the honeybee metaphor, by the way, for students. Honeybees go from flower to flower to flower to forage for nectar. So students today are, using an ecological term, foraging optimally for the education that they need. They may go to institution A for some courses, leave, because they need to go, raise a family, go do, work in a job or 2 or 3 jobs or whatever, come back, take another 2 courses here. They're adding on these credit hours. And our universities and colleges are built so that they can only take the credit hours that the student got at that particular institution. That's a wrong idea. We should say, student, you got these credit hours here, you got these credit hours there. Let's pull it all together and give you a degree. I'll give you my own daughter. She's now in a chair position at the University of Washington in public health. She went to New York University a few years ago. She did her degree in 3 years. She took 128 credit hours, semester credit hours. Okay. Whenever she came home in the summertime, we used to be in Manhattan, Kansas, at Kansas State University. I was the distinguished professor and department head there. She took classes at K-State in physics and math and science and things like that. And her advisors at NYU, this is back in 2001, 2002, they said, wow, Mega, my daughter's name is Mega, that's fantastic. You've already racked up enough credits. You should be able to get your degree. So they incorporated those credit hours into the credit hours that she had received at New York University. And she got the 128 credit hours, got her degree in 3 years.
That's a great example of radical cooperation academics.
Exactly.
We don't need to replicate technology and financial systems, all the things that are required to run an institution. We have found that a blessing within the community solution.
Very cool.
One CFO, one technology system, so we can deploy more on behalf of the students. Dr. Sonny Ramaswamy, I think this has been a very rich conversation. I know we could go on for hours and hours. I appreciate that you said we have externalities that we must deal with collectively, and yet we have to look at our own house and get that much more in order. And I love your focus on the student. It's the student's stupid. We can take that to the bank. So I know you remain very active. If you want to follow what Dr. Sonny Ramaswamy is up to, please follow him on LinkedIn. You can follow me, Dr. Michael Horowitz, and the Community Solution on LinkedIn as well. And of course, keep radically cooperating. Thank you, Sonny, for being with me today.
All right. Thanks so much, Michael. I appreciate it very much. All the best. Thank you for what you do, by the way.
Thank you for joining us on Radical Cooperation. Together, we can navigate the challenges facing higher education and find new paths forward. See you next time.